Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by the omnibudsman, the granddaddy of the modern constitutional libertarian movement, and his son is the U.S. Senator from Kentucky in all major polls, the front runner to be the Republican nominee. And, of course, that's Rand Paul, ladies and gentlemen. Former Congressman Ron Paul joins us here today to cover the waterfront. Thank you for coming on, sir. He also, of course, has RonPaulChannel.com, launching his own powerful multimedia TV print radio system. I'm on affiliates all over the country that carry his daily commentaries, and so I am able to hear those when I'm a guest. Very exciting to see Ron Paul and many others like Jesse Ventura starting their own media operations. This will fully overthrow the old dinosaur media system that's already discredited itself. Dr. Paul, out of the gates, Fort Hood situation. Our reporters last night talked to the commanding general. The video's on drudgereport.com. They confirmed he was on psychotropic drugs and Ambien. We're now learning he was on multiple drugs. What is your take on that as a medical doctor?
Well, obviously, I think the drugs have a major role to play in this almost all the time, whether there's high school shootings or wherever this occurs, that they're receiving this government-directed care for psychological problems and neuropsychotropic drugs. It's happening all the time. So that's the immediate thing that crosses my mind when I hear of this. And then when you hear of it being related to government and military and veterans, you can be guaranteed that they're getting the wrong kind of treatment. So medically, I think it's, that the diagnosis is wrong, the treatment is wrong, and we participate. We may take one thing and make it worse. I think what's happened is they look at these terrible acts, and yet they're merely a symptom of something else. And I think they never look for the cause. Why do people come back from war with this post-traumatic stress disorder and also the many brain injuries? Well, it's the war. It's the war that's going on there. And then when you think about, well, in medicine, we want to prevent diseases. But in politics, it doesn't seem like they want to prevent the harm done because, if you don't want these kind of problems, why don't we have a different foreign policy? This is a consequence. So they create the conditions to jeopardize all these young people. They come back. They can't get jobs. They become depressed. We put them on drugs. We make them a lot worse, and we don't change our foreign policy. We compound it. We create the problem, then give them drugs and make it worse, and then everybody is just totally shocked. So how could this happen? And fortunately, it's not happening more. I think they've created conditions which are so terrible. But the real tragedy, when we hear about the killings and all, but what about the hundreds of thousands now who are suffering, and they're just falling, talk about falling through the cracks. These people are out on the streets, and they're begging for treatment, and yet my big beef is they never look at the cause. During the campaign, we used to talk about, I emphasize this whole thing of blowback. Maybe we have a problem with terrorism, war on terrorism, because we have a deeply flawed foreign policy, and there is blowback. No, they're not going to talk about that, and they're not going to talk about wars that make no sense. And that, of course, is what I would think is the important thing. Otherwise, we're going to have this problem for a long time to come. It's probably still going to cost us trillions of dollars doing the wrong thing.
Well, you're an Air Force veteran, and, of course, during the Vietnam era, you saw a lot of duty there. Back even during Vietnam, they only made him serve 1 or 2 tours. One of my grandfathers, after he served his 22 flights in the Army Air Corps over Europe, was on the ground in Italy and was shaken for his whole life by the starving Italian children and the horrors he saw in Italy and the rest of Europe. That was just 2 years in the U.S. Army. And my other grandfather was affected by World War II in a crash he was in, both of them in the Army Air Corps. I just can't imagine these guys, many of them more than 10 tours of combat now. I don't think anybody mentally can handle that.
No, and that is a big thing. That is different, even though these wars are seen as not nearly as violent as the other ones. World War killed hundreds of thousands, and Vietnam killed a lot more. But a lot of people went, and a lot of people were injured and damaged. And And it's more than anybody ever imagined. And they went back and forth so often. They actually ended up in these recent wars with more days in duty and worrying about what mine they're going to step on and get blown up. But then there's the addition. Even though this problem existed in World War I and II, but it wasn't generally talked about. It's talked about now, but there's a lot more of it. And some people would think, well, maybe it has to do with the way we go to war. You would think maybe it would have been a lot easier to adjust if you were knowing that you were fighting Hitler, and this was a really, really important war to win. But now I think this compounds the stress disorder is when deep down in their heart, I think a lot of them realize that this was all just wasted time and wasted life and wasted money, and if they can't face that, then I think they harbor those deep feelings, and that contributes to it. And then all of a sudden, the doctor says, "Well, give them a pill," Well,
that's right.
It's going to make them feel better.
And again, you're a medical doctor and a veteran yourself, so you can speak directly to this. But that was well known after World War II, that if someone thought a war was just, you didn't have as many mental problems. But if you don't think it's just, you have serious problems. And it was the Nazis that pioneered drugging their troops with amphetamines and proto-psychotropics. So our military is following what the Nazis did.
Yeah. But, whether the war is just or not, what if you are thinking about maybe this is unjust, and then you suppress those feelings, you don't express them? It's suppression of some of these horrible thoughts. I cannot believe our government would do this. You mean that this was all wasted life? This was all done in vain? That is pretty hard to face up. What if you lost a loved one? Isn't it very natural for you want to make them a hero and say, well, he didn't die in vain. His life wasn't wasted. He died as a great protector of the Constitution, and so you have to suppress those feelings. And I think that is where the whole problem is compounded. And then they go to the doctor for a pill, and that makes the whole problem that much worse.
That's right. Former Congressman Ron Paul is our guest right now. They're on screen, ronpaulchannel.com. Excellent news, media, and liberty-based analysis with a truth bias. If they like to tell the truth, it's the opposite of the dinosaur media. Briefly, dinosaur media's numbers are dropping about 24% a year, according to Nielsen. At this rate, MSNBC, CNN will have less than 100,000 viewers within 2 years. One of our affiliates has ratings of over 100,000 listeners in 3 hours, Congressman. What do you predict is going to happen when my show has 3 million and the Ron Paul channel has millions and Drudge Report has 10 million a day and all this? What are they going to do? We're already the real media. What is the system going to do to counter this?
Well, they make efforts. They try to think that they're competing by having a website, and they can go watch videos and this sort of thing. But the business is going to change. I think the radio business will change, and they're going to go more to independent radios and webcasting and all these other things and podcasting.
Market-based.
Well, hopefully they're all put out of business.
Yes.
But the tragedy will be is, in a totalitarian country, and we have a little bit of this here where the government has to subsidize the media, so you might see it might get much worse, even though it's bad already, even though it will not give us news and the people won't want it, but the people will recognize it. But who knows, it might mean that the taxpayer is going to be forced to pay for some of that stuff, because I think the advertisers who still can make a market choice won't do it. They're going to go to the different sites to advertise and target their advertisement. That's why this is so attractive to so many of the people who are trying to sell products on the air.
I agree with you, though. They're going to pure state-run financed media to counter us and trying to censor the new media, trying to censor web freedom. But thank God you're there. I know that's one of the main initiatives you've got, Dr. Paul, is to keep the Internet free.
Absolutely, and it's constantly being threatened. Since I don't know all the technology involved in how the internet works. I'm betting on the free market and free individuals, and the fact that this is universal to come up and counteract everything that the government does. Get around it. So I'm hoping technology is the vehicle that undermines the authoritarianism that exists in so many of our governments, and that's what I'm hoping for.
That's right. We can compete and innovate our way out of the tyranny. That's our greatest Renaissance hope. All right, in the 4 or 5 minutes we've got left, sir, I want to get into what you've really been focusing on so eloquently. We've got a professor coming on later who backs you up. This issue of what's unfolding over in the Ukraine and the demonization by state-run media of anyone that doesn't want to have the EU and NATO take over Ukraine. I mean, they've taken over 90% of the country. They overthrew the government. This is a big defeat for Russia. As you said, Putin's no angel, but I mean, the media over here is acting like Russia is starting World War III. Instead, the West is starting a new Cold War. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. That's what they're doing, and I go back and forth from, the American people are buying into it again. They're listening to all the TV and going along with it. But then I go and I look for a glimmer of hope, and we find out that occasionally they'll do a poll, and that poll will show the American people are still coming toward our position and saying, no, we don't need another war. We don't need to, be involved. We don't need troops on the ground. But I don't think the average person on the street yet realizes how much money we put into messing around with the internal affairs of Ukraine for the last 10 years plus, with all the National Endowment for Democracies. Even Victoria Nuland admitted that the Department of State has spent over $5 billion interfering, with the government. So, yes, there are problems around, and like you said, we can't defend Russia as being the angels. But if we just stayed out of it, it would be a big help. There's no help at all whatsoever for us to be involved there. The evidence is so clear. Look, whether it's Libya or Egypt or Afghanistan or Iraq, Syria, we're over in Syria giving money and helping and aiding the Al-Qaeda. So, but I think the American people are waking up. They might not see it quite like I do about minding our own business and have non-interventions like our founders wanted, but the conservatives are saying, we are broke. There has to be a limit. Have you noticed that already? That some people are saying, well, that we better wake up because the bank is empty, and
That's right.
all they're doing is printing money. So we have to quit.
Well, that's the issue, is that the socialists and people want us bankrupt. They want us dependent. They want to wreck the golden goose so they can control everything. 2 final questions for Ron Paul of ronpaulchannel.com. Dr. Paul, looking at the presidential run, hands down, your son's the best candidate. He's leading in all the polls. Ted Cruz is also, I think, a great guy, but I don't completely overall trust him because I haven't known him like I've known your son for 16 years since he was campaigning for you to get back into Congress, for 17 years. I do trust Rand. He's done a great job. How do we get behind Rand? He's clearly going to run for president now. He started the exploratory group. He's the front runner. What are you planning to do to support him for president?
Well, mainly, trying to get people to understand the issues, because a person like Rand or myself or anybody that agrees with us, the problem is that the general population thinks it's not in their best interest if you don't want to promote war and welfare. Well, they want welfare. What we have to do is educate people to the point where we're realizing it's in their interest. Most people vote in their own self-interest, and as long as they think they're going to get something. The big bankers know exactly what they're doing. It's in their own interest, but we have to get people to understand it's in their best interest to vote for somebody like Rand, and even if they will be charged with saying, "Oh, they don't care about the poor people." You've heard that enough. They think that we have no concern. But the whole thing is, if anybody had any compassion or any concern for the poor, they ought to believe in liberty, because the evidence is so clear that the freer a country it is, the more prosperity and the greater chance that we have for peace. But it's mainly getting that out, mobilizing people, energizing people, getting supporters, sending money. All these things are necessary for a campaign to be successful. What about a Rand Paul, Ted Cruz ticket? Do you think Ted Cruz would run as VP? Oh, Oh, I have no idea. I imagine not too many people turn it down.
Well, I like Ted Cruz. What's your view of him?
Well, I have a hesitation about his foreign policy.
I do too, yeah.
I'm a little less interventionist than he is on foreign policy. But, you know, he's tough, and he certainly agrees with us on the medical care system in this country and how bad it is and what we ought to do. So. Speaking
of that, lastly, Obamacare, he says we can't repeal it. 80% in many polls are against it, but the Republican leadership, you know, helped write it as you exposed. What would you do, sir, to dismantle this? Everything you said about it has now come true. Your analysis was absolutely on target. It's worse than we even thought in many cases. It's bankrupting the country, raising payroll taxes on poor people. You know, the architect of it, Ezekiel Emanuel, admits it's meant to wreck the system. I mean, isn't that criminal?
Absolutely, and if you could, you know, if you had a Congress to pass a law to repeal it, you could. The odds of that happening are very slim, but there has to be a way that you can legalize freedom of choice to get out of an evil program, you know. And we sort of had that going, but now with Obamacare, it's been so de-emphasized, and that is the right of you and I to get out and take care of ourselves and get a tax deduction and have a medical savings account. People will just flock to that once they realize, you know, that these lies about Obamacare, you know, are lies and that people aren't going to be very happy with it. So we always have to have the right to opt out. We always should have, you know, just in schooling. You have to have a right to get out of the government schools. You have to be able to go to a private school or do homeschooling. And when they eliminate that, then we're in big trouble. And in medicine, they're essentially trying to do that for you, for any of us to opt out of the system. And right now, there's a lot of unhappy people because it's based on pure authoritarianism.
Wow. Well, former Congressman Ron Paul, ronpaulchannel.com. Thank you so much for your tireless defense of liberty. And we look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, sir.